You know, most of what I talk about on this channel revolves around knowledge in Pokemon, like knowing who can do what things and what countermeasures you can do to prevent them, you know, that sort of thing. And I'll stand by the fact that improving your knowledge is one of the quickest ways to get better at the game. However, when all is said and done, this is Pokemon, which is really just the most detailed game of rock, paper, scissors ever. And at a certain point, you just have to predict what your opponent is going to do. So I figured I'd throw together a quick video, not just on predictions, but 3 easy tips to learn for beginners to improve your guesswork and let you make the most out of these tricky 50-50 situations. Tip number 1, do judge a book by its cover. Right out of the gates, I know I might catch some flack for this one, but the fact is that players of different skill levels often share some tendencies. And if you can notice that, it can help tip the scales of your predictions by a huge amount. In my experience, lower level players are much less likely to switch and usually don't overpredict their moves. So that means if you've got a Chandelure in against an opponent's Ferrothorn, 90% of the time against most players, I'd expect to swap out. But with lower level players, there's often a much higher chance that they're just going to stay in there and just click the super effective dark type knockoff move, for example. Whereas on the flip side, mid-level players are often a little too quick to pull the trigger on a switch and often don't understand when it's time to cut their losses and pick a sack. Players like this can let their whole team take damage instead of cutting off a weaker link. And top level players, of course, don't usually have any larger generalized tendencies. They usually fully weigh the pros and cons of every move pretty evenly, and you know, that's what makes them top players, of course. They're not gonna have these big generalized biases. Of course, as I said at first, this is a pretty massive generalization, which leads me to points like 1B, I guess, which is try to play it safe for the first couple of turns of a match until you can get a feel for your opponent. Maybe don't overpredict the switch with your Excadrill turn 1, but on turn 11, after you've seen the same situation once or twice. Personally, as a mid-level player myself, I often like to mentally sort of tag my opponents as, you know, inclined to switch or perhaps inclined to stay in, and adjust my playstyle mid-match to fit that. Just a simple little thing you can do to quickly make some adjustments. Tip number 2, put yourself in your opponent's shoes. Sometimes it's so easy to get worked up on whether your opponent will stay in or swap out. You don't actually stop and realize that your opponent has nothing to gain by staying in. For example, if I've got a Reuniclus in against my opponent's Toxapex, and I'm fussing about whether I should use Psychic to hit the Pex super effectively, or a Shadow Ball to hit its Aegislash swap in, maybe I should instead stop and put myself in my opponent's shoes. Damn, I've got nothing to gain by staying in here. This Reuniclus completely walls me. I guess I'll go to my Aegislash. By thinking this way, you can catch some really obvious plays by your opponent that you might miss otherwise. Besides, even if you guess wrong in these situations like this, the matchup is often so favorable that you don't stand much to lose if you do overpredict, and it can even gain you some insight into your opponent's tendencies, kind of going back to 1B that I mentioned earlier. Which leads us to our third and final tip, which is weighing the pros and cons of all of our predictions. And this is a big one. I mentioned before that a big trap lower to mid-level players get caught in is only considering the turn immediately in front of you, and as a result weighing each 50-50 equally, when in reality that couldn't be any further from the truth. Let's look at 2 different scenarios where I'm playing against an opponent's Excadrill, and I'm not sure if this Excadrill is going to attack me or try to get up Stealth Rocks. In the first scenario, I've got especially defensive Sylveon in, and in the second, I have a weather-setting Torkoal. So really, in a vacuum, this prediction is the same. Will they attack, or won't they? But when you actually look at this in the scheme of the matches they're in, that couldn't be any more different. The Torkoal sets up the sun for this weather team. I want to keep him as healthy as possible for as long as possible so I can maintain the sun for my attacking Pokemon. Also, this is the only Stealth Rocker and my Rapid Spinner. If I predict wrong here, I'm in a massive hole for the rest of the game. On the other hand, the Sylveon does not have a great matchup versus my opponent. You know, that's just the nature of the game. Different Pokemon are going to put in different amounts of work depending on the matchups. And in this one, there's just not a lot I can see the Sylveon doing. So really, if I guess wrong here, it's not that big of a deal, because it wasn't doing much for me anyways. At least this way, it has an opportunity to get rid of a problematic Pokemon. So this exact example is huge when you're weighing a 50-50 and should be the first thing you're thinking of every time you're weighing a decision. What do I stand to gain by overpredicting? What do I stand to lose? Sometimes, a simple mid-ground can keep you from throwing away a massive win con, even if you thought you had that prediction in the bag. As a quick aside, another example of this can be found when playing against offense or hyper offense teams. Sometimes you think to yourself, well, what happens if I underpredict here and the Cloyster gets a free swap in? Well, it could set it for free and I lose the entire game. This kind of flies in the face of my earlier tip of taking it easy at first when it comes to predictions. That's just because the early turns of a hyper offense game can be so decisive. Once again, try to avoid thinking just one turn ahead, but instead maintain a game plan that evolves as the conditions of the match themselves do. With that said, here's the 3 tips for you guys once again. Try to keep them in mind next time you're stuck with a scary looking prediction. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider liking the video or subscribing to the channel. And if you have any other questions, video ideas, or you just want to hang out, come swing by my Discord. I've got a link in the description below. Thanks again, take it easy.